23 cities in 19 Asian territories. The team, the largest social media team in the region, helps companies to conceive, develop, execute social media strategies. Passionately involved in digital since 2004, he writes a widely read blog, thomascrampton.com, and is frequently keynote speaker and moderator at high-profile conferences around the world, from the World Economic Forum in Davos to Le Web in Paris, Cannes Lions, and DLD in Munich. Currently on the board of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Hong Kong, Thomas has served as president of that club as well as president of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand, and on the board of the New York-based Overseas Club. He is also co-founder of the Foreign Correspondents Club charity fund that raised more than $5 million to support the higher education of disadvantaged children from Paul Leung Cook. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Thomas Crampton.
Testing. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Thank you very much. It's great to be here back in Manila. Been far too long. It's the first time I've appeared in a cinema in pretty much anywhere, but particularly Manila. What I'm supposed to talk about to you, I think I have maybe one of the harder jobs here because I'm speaking after lunch, and I'm supposed to be speaking about social media and ROI, which is sort of justifying whether there's value in social media. I think it's a very important topic, and I think it's key, and I think nobody should invest in social media unless they can prove its value and its effectiveness, and I think that any moves towards that are very important and very powerful. In order to keep everyone awake after lunch, I'd like to make this as interactive as possible. So at any time, please interrupt me, and at certain times I will stop speaking in order to hopefully get people to engage and ask questions. The more difficult the questions, the better. I have lots of case studies, examples, and the more difficult the question, the better I like it. Very briefly, as mentioned, I formerly was a foreign correspondent for most of my career, actually. That's me, the one with the glasses in that picture. And then went into digital and social. So really I've gone through quite a bit of the transition that companies and brands have gone through in terms of moving from a world where traditional media mattered, and that's where brands would be made, to social media, where today brands are being made and broken online every day. And one of the interesting things about the world of social media is that it's one where the agile will succeed. This is a study done of the amounts of online engagement and digital activity taking place on airlines around Asia. The red ones are the challenger airlines. That's not the PALs or the Thai Airways or the Malaysian Airlines. And those are the ones that have been exploiting digital the most. Those are the ones that have been moving quickly. So it's a real time, a point of inflection for those companies that get digital and understand social. They can move quickly, they can change quickly, they can move to new business models before the incumbents have had a chance to wake up. That said, it's very important not to throw away everything that there is, that we've learned over the last decades about social media, about marketing and advertising. This is David Ogilvy, the founder of Ogilvy, of course. And I put him up there not because I'm some sort of Ogilvy acolyte, but because he is actually one of the original madmen, and he really was at the invention of this entire industry. And his take on that was that we don't really act in terms of a quick tactic or a quick win. We have to build brands over time, and we have to look to the long-term interests of the brand. That's very important when we're dealing with social media, because we don't want to pass out the social media presence to the summer intern. We want to make sure that the highest level people are engaged in it, and that we have the most value being created for the company, that is really moving the company from the previous world of one-way broadcast to the world of engagement in a way that remains consistent with the brand. With social media, as I said, one of the important things is to understand what is the business value. If we're just spending our time chasing after likes and building a big Facebook presence, is that really a worthwhile use of our time and limited resources? Should we be doing that to gather a lot of likes? Should we be doing that at all? Should we be on Facebook? Should we be in social media? These are very important questions for people to ask before committing the limited amount of time and resources that people have to social. If you look at some of the value that social brings, there's been a number of studies that show that it does actually bring value. These are 3 studies done. The first one was actually an Ogilvy study that I'll make a little bit of reference to, which I'm happy to share the underlying studies, the underlying data to. But it's just people exposed to to social content by itself or in conjunction with other media are much more likely, 7 times more likely to consume a product. Word of mouth is really the most powerful way to make people sort of close a deal on purchase. This was a study done by a company called Purchased, actually. And I was just looking at a study yesterday by Millward Brown in terms of luxury consumers and digital. And what they found is using the platform WhatsApp, the IM 3.0 platform WhatsApp, that actually is turned into one of the most important decision points in making a purchase in Hong Kong. There's these groups on WhatsApp. I was very surprised with WhatsApp. Actually, first, let me do a quick survey here. How many people are on WhatsApp in this room? How many people have WhatsApp on their phone? WeChat? Kakao Talk? Line? So it looks like WhatsApp wins, which was interesting. In Hong Kong, what happened was I was asking about this, and I was very surprised when the study came back showing how popular WhatsApp was for the purchase decision. I said, isn't this a WeChat kind of a territory? And they said, well, actually what happens is there's these small groups in Hong Kong referred to as the Mugwai's group, Mugwai meaning devil, the devil groups. And the devil groups are where groups of shoppers, generally women shoppers, will share, should I get this handbag, should I get these shoes? They take the photos off of a social networking platform, such as Facebook or Sina Weibo, and then they will share it on WhatsApp and equally share that eventually on WeChat as well, I guess, over time. So these are very important ways in which to encourage people to make these experiments, to make these purchases. And the final study here is by McKinsey, talking about the ROI in terms of traditional marketing that the traditional telcos have had on them. Basically, what we have to do is find ways to grow the ROI. In order to grow ROI, is enable people to inspire, enable them to talk positively about a product or a service. This will bring about the purchases and this elusive search for ROI. This chart shows the sad truth, which is people show a huge amount of satisfaction about brands. They love brands, but the brands do not assist themselves. They don't help the consumers in terms of sharing what they like about the brand. So brand advocacy, meaning a brand that is helping people be positive about that brand, we found in this study really just accounted for 1%. So the opportunity there is the 79% of people who love a brand but don't actually talk about it. Sticking with the ROI theme, I'd like to quickly just show a video here. I've got a number of videos which I'd love to show here. This one is one that is very much in line with the ROI theme. Then I'll go a bit into what it is that makes a good social media strategy and how to build one up. What are the key parts of it. But this is a very ROI-focused video for a project we did with IBM that was helping them use an event to more effectively market and get people involved in that event.
The opening years of the 21st century marked the first time that more than half the people on the planet lived in cities. As cities become more crowded, the pressure on city leaders also increases, and it becomes more difficult to find and connect with these leaders. This was IBM's challenge, to identify and connect with the decision makers responsible for the departments and systems that make our cities work. Our solution was to tap into the desire of city leaders not to be isolated, but to be connected. Rather than rely solely on traditional and temporary events, we created Smarter Cities Connect, a custom group on LinkedIn that functioned as an always-on virtual event. We began with a stream of curated and original content, case studies, videos, white papers, research reports, discussions, and more. Then, a targeted media campaign invited civic leaders to join the group. Soon after, the network effect took over as the most active members began inviting their own connections, bringing the total to over 12,000 hand-picked civic leaders by the end of the first year. For IBM, it's not about numbers as much as it is about connections, introducing city leaders to world-class experts that can help them design and build the cities of the future. Using geo-targeting and deep profiling, we constantly migrate the connections that form within the group and bring them to our series of live Smarter Cities forums and summits. It's these face-to-face connections that are delivering the business value of a global community as we continue to help build a smarter planet, one city at a time.
So what this is doing is allowing IBM to build this community of people that they are then connecting with, and they're becoming clients of IBM, and they very much are obsessed with measurement at IBM, and you can actually measure the business value of that, how much money is saved in building those connections, and how much revenue is driven out of it. And what it's doing is allowing a way to connect and really link people together in ways that were not possible before. Some of the elements of a good social media strategy, which I'll just quickly go over here, because then I really want to get to, we don't have a lot of time, I want to get to your questions or responses or thoughts on this topic. Some of the elements that we really need, I'm going to go very quickly, so if anybody has any further questions on this, don't hesitate to raise your hand and interrupt. But one of the important things is having a plan. The plan is working off of a strong framework which allows you to understand where you're starting from, so you really want to benchmark at the beginning. This is so you can know how you're succeeding. Understand what content you're activating against. Content is one of the most important things in social media. Curating a community, managing a community is really a very difficult, much more difficult thing to do than people think, and I'll come to an example of that in just a moment. And you want to figure out how you're going to optimize that, how you're going to grow it, and then you want to measure it at the end and figure out how you can shift it and make it work much better. In terms of building out a community, there's one example which some of you may be familiar with, and I apologize if you've seen this video before, but this is a pretty good example of where a company went in for a very in-depth level of community engagement on a daily basis. And this is obviously, as anybody who works in companies and in social knows, much more difficult than it seems to be. From the point of view of an individual, okay, I'm going to take a photo every day on Instagram and post it. That's pretty easy. But getting the agreement of a major corporation to talk about a brand and do it in a consistent and very compelling way is a huge challenge, and that's a challenge that Oreo took up in their Daily Twist campaign.
Little girls have pretty curls, but I like Oreo.
Oreo recently celebrated a big birthday. Really big. Turning 100 can mean just one thing. You're old. Really old. Unless you give it a twist. The Oreo Daily Twist. A simple idea to make this old brand a vital part of pop culture, the digital world, and everyday conversation all at once. 100 pieces of content created in 100 days. In honor of the 100th birthday. 100% responsive. Here's how it worked. Every morning, we searched for what people were talking about. Once concepts were developed, there was a full production team waiting to execute. By 6 p.m., we pushed the day's twist out to Oreo's 30 million Facebook, Pinterest, and Twitter followers and archived it on Oreo's online hub. How do we kick it off? Well, maybe you heard about that.
Oreos are gay.
Monday night, Oreo posted this on their Facebook page.
New rule, wingnuts have to stop saying they're going to boycott Oreos because they made a gay cookie.
But we didn't stop there, and neither did the fans. In just 100 days, we turned an old cookie into an icon. Oreo didn't just reflect the news, it became the news. And we made 100 years old look pretty young.
Beyond the content and the framework, you will also, some other things that you're going to need to really keep in mind are how to grow the internal knowledge across a company. This includes inspiring people to get involved, educating them how they can drive forward social within the company, and then measuring the progress towards that. Content creation systematically, that's the Oreo example. We do that with a number of clients right now, including one major airline where we have a contractual obligation that they must respond to us. It's the agency asking the client to respond, which is quite funny, within 2 hours to say that we can put a post up in order to keep that systematic moving forward of the content. In this model, what we're talking about is collecting the content online, seeing what is relevant, understanding it, analyzing it, how can we use it, coming up with creative ideas that can make it interesting, strategizing how to put it out there, and then responding to comments and optimizing what works. The media strategy, the paid media strategy has to be very closely tied in with this in order to make it work. We never know what we're going to buy media on until it takes off. Scaling of content is very important. This means finding ways to build something out across different geographies. If we're doing it in the Philippines, let's find a way that it can also be relevant for Malaysia, for Thailand. Scaling it out across different platforms is very valuable as well. The Oreo example talked about putting it across Pinterest, across Facebook. Any tools that we can use to make that faster are very valuable. This is one of the biggest mistakes that people will make. This is an example of the levels of engagement in the F&B industry, restaurants, etc. And what we'll find here is the black line in this graph, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The black line is when people are engaging the most and looking at Facebook and figuring out where they're going to eat at restaurants and make their decisions for the weekend. The red lines there are the days on which people are, restaurants and F&B outlets are posting their content. You'll notice there's a big spike on Friday. That spike on Friday in terms of posting, I think, is probably because people are getting around to Friday and they're thinking, gee, I better post something before the weekend. It turns out that there are not very many people by Friday making their decisions about F&B. That was all done back on Tuesday and Wednesday when there weren't so many postings going up. So really what you need to do is understand when people are going to be looking for your content in order to get the highest level of engagement. Another thing we find is very important is breaking things. This means looking to understand what bridges need to be built, how things need to be done differently, how you can change the way that things are done. All too often there's I've been in meetings where 2 or 3 different parts of a company think that they are the ones in charge of the Facebook page. And it's a very funny conversation where you're like, well, I thought I was in charge. Or else there's like one's in charge of the Facebook page, the other's in charge of LinkedIn. They're all over the place. So what you have to do is build bridges and make people talk to each other who've never talked to each other within an organization. In this example, it's looking at, there's the internet, we're looking at a dashboard of some sort, and then we're trying to figure out what has to be addressed to the chef, to the concierge, or the general manager. And in the past, maybe the chef never had to deal with people from the outside world except in the written note saying that somebody got sick from the fish last week. Now they have to respond. Now they have to be involved and they have to get in there. And there have to be bridges built between the communications and marketing end of an organization and other parts of it. And this brings us back around to the ROI end of things, which is measurement, measurement, measurement. It's very important. How do we measure the effectiveness of social media? The ways in which we do it are using a traditional sort of sales funnel model, which begins awareness, evaluation, engagement, conversion. We simplified that to reach, preference, and action. For reach, preference, and action, this allows us to measure for reach something like the growth of a fan base, the increased visits to a website, anything that is about the broad measure of things in that sense. Preference will be how many people are speaking positively about us now as compared to previously. How much are they talking about us as opposed to the rivals or as opposed to the industry as a whole? And how much have we changed that over time? And finally, action we will measure through click-throughs, through participation rates, through purchases. So through this reach, preference, and action measurement, we can figure out what's working and what is not working. The interesting part about it is I would love to be able to say, you know, social media, we've got it figured out. We don't have it figured out. We're learning things every single day. And sometimes, that's why we measure as much as we can. Sometimes we'll find that, wow, this really took off. We didn't expect it to. We had one client we were working with where we just, for the sake of experimentation, we put a coupon code out. This is a toy company, an Asian toy company looking to the U.S. market. And we put a coupon code out just to see what would happen. And it took off like wildfire. And based on that, we had a total shift. Okay, it now appears that parents looking to these toys are very apt to make decisions if we put a coupon code out. And in fact, we had to shut down that coupon as quickly as we could because it got a little bit more uptake than the client had expected. But it just shows that you have to really figure out things on the fly. But at the end of the day, look to understand what is the business impact. This is an example of a community we worked on in Taiwan, and it was a credit card that we were helping. Credit card was the Fubon Bank credit card, which was a distant third place compared to Citibank. Citibank is the market leader. And for this, we built a food-related community that allowed people to exchange tips on which they thought were the best restaurants, and the best restaurants were then approached to participate in the Fubon Bank promotion. We couldn't figure out how well the promotion worked, in part because the credit card company was a little bit reluctant to release their data, but then we discovered that, and they couldn't measure, the marketing department couldn't get the numbers from the other departments. Then we did a bit of exploring and figured out that by law, all credit card companies are required to report to the Central Bank of Taiwan their transaction level that month. And what we found was the number of transactions on the Fubon Bank credit card shot up by 6% that month, while Citibank went down. And there might be a direct relationship there, because what you have is people will have 2 or 3 credit cards in their wallet, and they just decide which one to pull out. So that's a good measure of the success of that. I have 1 or 2 more case studies that I'd love to show, but before I do, in the remaining, we probably have 5-10 minutes, if possible, please. We're actually going over to discuss. But I'd love if there are any questions or comments or thoughts on social media, ROI, mobile, any of these aspects and some of the challenges that people are facing in what they're doing. Question, yes.
To what extent can you... I got a mic?
A shout and I will repeat the question.
To what extent can you extrapolate from social media performance for, say, one campaign through to lifetime value of a customer to a brand or a client?
So it's to what extent can we extrapolate from a social media campaign through to the lifetime value of a customer? Yeah. That's a very good question. And I think it hits on something that I've not spoken about yet, but in terms of getting ROI out of social media, really is a zone that is going to be extremely fruitful in the coming years, and it's something that's just sort of taking off over the last 12 months or so, which is social CRM. And that's where you're not just growing a community out there of unidentified people that are may or may not be your customers, but you're actually linking up these social profiles with actual customers. And you're doing two things. One, you are getting your customers to helping enable your customers to share their experiences. And the opportunity there is the graph I showed earlier, which is people love brands, but brands don't help themselves to share or help their customers to share what's positive about them. So what you want to be able to do is find ways to have your loyal customers speak about you. And some of them are very basic things, like allowing sharing functionality on a website. Some of them can be involved in campaigns that engage your customer base and grow it. And the other thing, so the one thing is you're trying to help your loyal customers to speak about you. And the other one is you want to get influencers who might not be big customers to speak about you, but because they're influential. And in the case of a fashion brand, that might be a high-influence fashion blogger or influencer of some sort who's relatively young and not going to be buying haute couture, but will be somebody that influences others and shows them that they should consider buying it. So really what you want to be able to do is use social media as a way to increase the size of the purchase basket and the frequency of purchase of people, which is really what lifetime value is all about, and traditional CRM, and link the two together.
I think Thomas wants to happen is that go ahead and ask your questions.
We have a question over here.
Okay.
Sir, you mentioned earlier that
you're the star now.
Yeah. ROI through social is all about getting the sale. You know, our bottom line is always building that relationship with our clients and encouraging them to purchase our products. My question is, with all these things in consideration, are we then saying that there's a possibility that we also shorten the path to purchase?
Okay, first, slight correction. I'm not saying that social, the objective of social and business needs to be aligned. Mm-hmm. The objective of business is obviously to sell more of our products. But as with marketing in general, everything you do is not necessarily about a sale.
Okay.
A branding campaign in a print ad, a gorgeous print ad for a car, they're not hoping to, they're not going to count that there are 16 cars that have been purchased. There are different roles for social, some of which can be very sales focused in obvious ways, such as click through and buy this, some of which can be less sales focused. So for example, the IBM one, I would argue, is one that does have a very clear ROI, but never in it are you saying, hey, buy IBM, buy IBM. It's not pushing it in that way. So there is definitely a sales end to it, but branding remains very important on a lot of levels.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thomas, I think it is also in connection to what he asked earlier. I'd just like to get your comment. Altimeter, in one of the reports on the business of social, said ROI is just one metric in the social media toolkit. Rather than focusing social media as a monolithic entity, business should evaluate it based on its range of business goals. Care comment on that?
Yeah, that's right in line with what I was saying, exactly. And I think one of the ways in which you can measure ROI, and this is in terms of not measuring it necessarily about how many, whatever product I'm selling, widgets did I sell to my Facebook fans. What we need to do is measure it within the broader universe of what is happening. How is it having impact in other ways, maybe not directly through social media. Another example of something where we had very measurable ROI, it was not through social or digital that we had it. This is a campaign we did in Hong Kong for Huggies. And with this campaign, we had huge levels of engagement. We had a significant portion, in fact, it was quite an interesting campaign. It was one of these ones that got a little bit out of control in a good way and set off all these alarm bells at Facebook because the community grew so quickly they thought something must have been wrong or that we might have hacked the site or I don't know what it was. But we got a significant percentage of the newly born children in Hong Kong's photographs, thanks to a very clever campaign, were submitted to this Huggies Facebook page. And what's the ROI of somebody submitting a photo? I don't know. Nobody buys diapers online. It turns out we got the sales figures month by month for the diapers, and it was the highest level of sales figures for diapers for Huggies that month, that particular month. What was interesting about it is diapers are a very, I hate to say this, sticky product. Once you choose a diaper, once it works, the parents will tend to stick with it. What we found was, or what Huggies, Kimberly Clark found was that the sales of accessories related to diapers. What are accessories in diapers? If you're not a parent, you will not necessarily know. The accessories can be wipes, for example. The accessories that don't mean you're switching your diaper, you're just switching some aspect of it, the sales of that went up even further than the diapers did that month. So that was a campaign that entirely took place in digital and social, and there was no way that anybody could make any purchase through that, yet there was an impact that we could measure in terms of the business outcome. And that's extremely important. In that case, we can then measure and say, okay, there was this amount of value for that particular campaign. The mistake is to say that you can't measure it. I mean, this example here is one where we thought we couldn't measure it. Turns out we could measure it. Always find a way to measure it, to justify it, and that way, what starts as a small involvement of a company in social media will grow very quickly when people can see the rational value in what they're doing.
Questions? Yes. Over here. Go.
Hi, for that particular example of Huggies, that campaign was you had a campaign exclusively on social media, am I correct?
Sort of. Finish your question and I'll explain.
Because in that example, I'm assuming that you were able to attribute your sales to social media, that it was effective since the sales increased. And you attributed it to social media because it was the only marketing campaign you had?
So the question is, how did we attribute that to social?
Yes.
Okay. I'll tell you a little bit more about the campaign in this case. The campaign actually was one, and this is what we very much advocate, social should not be done in isolation. Social is much more powerful when it is used in an integrated way across many different elements of the marketing strategy. So we are very hesitant to say, first of all, the right answer is not let's start a Facebook page or let's do something on social media. The right answer is what is the best thing for the business outcome and how can we achieve that. In this case, we had a supercharged campaign that took place, the core of it on Facebook, but it actually involved, and we're missing one element here in this slide, in fact. We had ads on parenting forums that were nothing relation to this. They were just pointing people, telling this was going on. We had Facebook ads. We had the email group of Huggies customers. And we also, one that's not shown on here, we also actually had a TV ad which spoke about it. And it was all in relation to putting these photographs up on the most traditional of media of all, which is print ads, bus ads that were driving around Hong Kong. And sort of as a follow-up to what happened here, we faced a problem that there were so many submissions and we could only fit, I think, like 50 children on the bus, that we risked annoying or aggravating a significant portion of Hong Kong's new parents by not putting their child's photos up. So what we did was found this compromise. We bought a giant billboard, or two giant billboards, one in a tram station in Causeway Bay, a very busy part of Hong Kong, and one in Central in the MTR, and stuck the photos of every single baby up on that. So we could have this compromised position, which was, again, very, very traditional. So social was the core of it, but it was not the only part of it.
So when you present it to client, you basically tell them that, for example, it's like 60% of the sales could be attributed to social, and then 40% of the sales could be attributed to ATL media. I'm just...
we wouldn't break it down like that. We'd say this campaign, the core of which everyone agreed was social. They did not have there was zero social media presence before this. They did not have a Facebook page.
Oh, okay.
It was a campaign, the core of which is social, that caused this, had this effect. And we would never advocate you should do just a social campaign. We will always try to make it as integrated as possible, because the power of very traditional paid media is still very huge, even though social is the new kid on the block.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Here, questions? Yes,
Sorry, where are we?
over here.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Trisha from Ogilvy, Manila.
Hello.
I have two questions actually. Most clients right now, their basis for a success of like all social media assets or just fan growth. Do you have other KPIs that you can suggest as a relevant KPIs? And my second question is, do you have any tools in the region that you can recommend to measure these KPIs? That's all.
Yeah, the most important measures are not about fan growth. Fan growth is a measure, and we should definitely see where it's going and see what's going on with that, but it's no particular value in and of itself. There's some amazing statistics which keep shifting over time about the number of people who see something that's posted on a page or a timeline from a brand. It turns out most people really don't care about brands. They don't care what a brand is posting, and then part of the role that we play in talking to brands is telling them, sorry, but people really don't care about you and your brand. They don't. So growing fans is of no real value unless you're getting engagement from those fans. That's where the real value comes in that, and that's where you're showing that this is an audience that is interested in what you're doing. They're interacting with you. They believe in you, and you can't get that engagement except through putting up valuable, legitimate content that they really find useful to themselves. And it's not going to be talking about how great your company is, and that's the challenge that a lot of companies face. They're used to this world of one-way broadcast where they say, we're great, and repeat it ad nauseum, and then hope that people will end up listening. There's this one, a colleague of mine loves this cartoon by Hugh MacLeod, which is if you talk to people the way that advertising talks to people, they'd punch you in the face. So engagement is a good measure about whether you are truly behaving as a brand, a modern engaged brand that is able to talk to the consumers rather than somebody who can just either, if you want fan growth, there are companies, a lot of them are actually based in the Philippines, some of them are based in Indonesia, where you can buy fans. Go ahead and do that. There's zero value there. You're better off spending that money doing something that brings engagement, which brings me back very quickly, and I see there's a couple questions, and I'm going to come to that in a second, but that brings me back to that IBM example. The IBM LinkedIn group, one of the KPIs is nothing to do with fan growth. They don't want a huge number of fans. They want several hundred of the most important people who are interested in exchanging ideas about how to avoid having situations like the Manila traffic out there and solving all these problems that cities have. They could care less about fan growth. Their measure is who are we talking about, who are we talking to, and how much are they engaging with our content? Are they looking at the white papers we're putting up? Are they looking at the studies we're putting up? Are they asking us questions? That's what's going to be of value, not the number of people in that LinkedIn group. So
Yeah,
Last two questions.
It's perfect that you mentioned engagement because I'm curious about that. It's not like, because my name is Karen, I work for a radio station, Yes FM. So when we advertise over TV or radio, it's a one-way street. It's just us talking to them. And because of the internet, if you put your brand out there, you're allowing them to talk to you, to give you a response. So I'm asking this mainly because you're from Ogilvy and Mather, and I want to know, how do you arrest negative feedbacks that they're so willingly to give openly? And
Okay, negative feedback. There's good ways to deal with it and bad ways to deal with it. Knocking people off your page, hiding the comments, that's not a good way to deal with it. It's going to come back. We've had some situations where, one of the problems with social media, people used to say, don't come to me if you have a bad product because my job is to make people talk about it. But in fact, we can deal with situations where you have a bad product. We had one example of a national telco carrier, a former monopoly holder, that had terrible customer service and terrible service. It's bad service. They came to us. They had a Facebook page with, more than 1 million fans. Most of the comments on the page were complaining about the coverage. My phone dropped. I can't believe I'm in the middle of the Capitol. All this sort of things. Just really negative page. They asked us, "What can you help us?" So we went to help them, and what we did is we went through their page, and we figured out who was commenting on it, what were they saying, just analyzing it. And we drilled it down to about 40 people. Of those, half of them had legitimate customer complaints. Their cell phone was broken, something went wrong in the customer service process that could be addressed. And our advice was, go deal with those people, solve them. That's an easy win. So they went off and dealt with that. Of the remaining 20, 2/3 of those were people who had problems that the company could not solve. But they seemed like reasonable people. So we told they advised the company, look, what you should do is go to these people and tell them, yes, the coverage is very bad in that part of town. It's not going to change anytime soon. Or, we're planning to erect a tower there in 3 months, or whatever the truth of the matter is. Just tell them what it is. They'll solve the, apologies, but that's what the situation is. And they immediately stopped reposting. Then there were the crazies. These were the people who, by our assessment, no matter what you said to them, you would not appease them, they would not go away. So ignore them. And then at the same time as that, we started doing a lot of things on the page that involved competitions, or we had one which was a video competition to win the right to try out one of these new phones. Some of them were just incredible. Some I would never forget one video that a mother did with her daughter. Really amazing videos. And that was the content that was coming up and dominating the page. So
trumping everything that is negative.
Sorry?
It trumped everything that is
Well, the
negative.
negativity dropped off hugely because we got rid of 35 of the negative biggest commenters. And the content that was going up was all about the more positive things that they were doing. So suddenly this page went from being wildly negative to extremely positive, and the cell phone company still to this day has terrible coverage.
Thank you very much.
Last question, because Thomas has to has a flight. He might end up to be, rock star exit. So one last question. Yes?
Yeah. Hi. Can you please dim the lights and light?
You're a rock star.
First of all, my concerns regarding the social social media's ROI regarding the engagement. You mentioned a while ago that likes should not be considered by itself, and then you kept it focusing on engagement. Now I noticed about comments, shares, and likes. These three things cannot be put to the same pedestal. These things have their own different sets of values. And in the previous IMAP sessions before, there was some arguments on how do we put a figure on these metrics, because by themselves they don't need much, but if you put it together, there is some value in it. And my question here is, is there a way for us to make a measurement that's similar to the GRP, or should we go that route in the first place?
Well, I mean, one way that people have tried to summarize the value, and particularly on Facebook, of all of these different interactions is Facebook itself. They have the measurement PTAT, people talking about this.
Yeah.
And that's one measure that they use to try and figure out what is the value. And I think, if you're putting up all kinds of content and you're trying to figure out what is of more value, it will depend what you're trying to do. Sometimes it's going to be likes, sometimes it's going to be comments, sometimes it's going to be sharing.
If I add, it's like confusing for me to measure Facebook versus Twitter versus Pinterest, because they all have their own different kinds of metrics or their own kinds of ways of measuring themselves. So my concern as a marketer, unlike the GRP where you have a unifying measurement, here you have different kinds of measurements, from likes, comments to shares, from different multiple platforms at the same time, giving their own values. That is confusing to me on how to put that value there.
I guess as somebody who's involved in social media, I look at a lot of more traditional measurements, and I don't know GRP well enough to discuss that. Yeah. But there are a lot of more traditional kinds of measurements that, to my mind, seem to simplify almost to the point of being meaningless. So they give you a single number, but what do they really mean at the end of the day? If you talk about reach, for example, of a newspaper, well, did anybody read that ad on that page at all? What we've got with social media is an ability to measure an awful lot more. And yes, it can be a little bit confusing because channels are opening up, channels are becoming less popular. But that fragmentation, that's a function of this media fragmentation we're facing. What we need to do is measure over time, and we will figure out what is the right model as we go forward. You know, a Facebook van's value today is different from what it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And it's going to have to be an evolution over time. There's not going to be one simple solution of this is worth that amount or media equivalency. You know, we're not, because I would take issue with the whole concept of media equivalency. I think some of these are shortcuts that people use, which are less meaningful than a lot of the measures that we can actually take out of social media, which gives us a precise measure of the number of people taking a particular action.
So you're saying that we should attempt even coming up with a similar GRP kind of rating for online?
I think it will evolve over time, and we'll figure out what that is. And some of the measures that we come up with will be pretty good, and then they will become irrelevant. You know, everybody moves away from Facebook. All the measures we figured out about Facebook will no longer be valuable.
Thank you.
So it's going to be complex going forward, but fun.
Yeah. Thank you.
As I told you, Thomas, this is one interesting topic. That
Yes.
It can go on for 2 hours or 3 hours if you want to. Anyway, Thomas, thank you for sharing your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thomas?
Thank you very much.